Alrighty. Um, Welcome, everyone. I'll get started in just a moment. I would ask the good fire chief to say a few words before we get started. Chief?
Thank you, Ernst. Good afternoon, everyone. Now, I know many on the call, but for those of you that I have not yet met, I'm Mike Kresick, Fire Chief for the City of Oak Creek Fire Department. Also from our department today, Assistant Chiefs Mike Havey and Tom Joneson. So welcome to our community stakeholders feedback session. As you may know, we are in the process of developing our next strategic plan, and we're excited to obtain your feedback and comments today. And we are looking forward to using that feedback during our internal planning sessions later in the month. So I do want to acknowledge first a couple members of our city staff and thank them for their support of the fire department and specifically their support of our strategic planning process. Mayor Dan Bukewicz, our alderpersons, police and fire commission members, and our city administrator, Andrew Vickers. Most importantly, I do want to thank the citizens, city employees, board and commission members, and other interested parties that are taking time out of their schedules to help us with our feedback session today. I appreciate you taking that time and helping us with our process. So with that, I will turn it back to Ernst to facilitate today's session.
Thanks very much, Chief. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ernst Piercy. I represent the Center for Public Safety Excellence. As you may know, the Center for Public Safety Excellence is a nonprofit 501c3 that is dedicated to improving fire and emergency services on an international level. As your facilitator, I'll be the face of today's community meeting. In the background, working in the background, will be Chief Brian Dean. He will be running the control room, if you will. And if you have any questions specific to this process, not to the fire department, of course, those would go directly to the fire department. But if you have any questions specific to this process that perhaps we haven't answered at the end of the formal component of what I'm doing today, please put that information into a chat and we'd be happy to respond to that. And speaking of which, keep an eye on the chat to see if there's any questions or concerns that come up relative to where you sit within the community or related to the process in any way at all. We'd be happy to address those. One thing I would ask is for those folks that have already signed in, if you would ensure that your name that as displayed on the Zoom console is your actual name. Sometimes it comes in as the name of the computer that you're logged into, perhaps, or something like that. But that way we can ensure that you can get the surveys that will come at the end of this. And let's talk a little bit about the process for just a moment. So I am going to do less than 20 slides, because I know that you're not here to watch a PowerPoint presentation. The purpose of my slides over the next 20 to 30 minutes or so is just to introduce the process and to let you know what it is that the Oak Creek Fire Department is going through and why they're doing it, and sort of the whole procedural end of it. And then at the very end, as we are going through this, Chief Dean in the background will be sending you an email with a set of survey links. There are 2 surveys total that we would ask you to complete at the end of the session. The time that the fire chief has asked you to allocate for this meeting does in fact include the time that it takes to complete the survey. So we're not going to keep you any longer, I assure you. In fact, the surveys have a lot of value, and that's actually where we're going to glean the feedback that we'll need over the 3-day session that will follow this as we work with your fire department. Just real quick, by way of introduction, I said my name already, Ernst Piercy. I'm a retired fire chief. I did 36 years in the fire department. So obviously my background is all in fire and emergency services and working with communities to develop, an appropriate posture for the community. So with that said, let's go ahead and start talking about the strategic planning process. So the first quote that you see on the screen today was actually said in 1958 by Dr. Peter Drucker. And as you may know, Peter Drucker is the modern guru, if you will, of total quality management. And what he said was, or what he meant by this statement was, that we have to consider not only the decisions that we make today, but the futurity of our decisions. The futurity meaning, okay, so this is important today, why we're doing things today, but what is the long-term implication of the decisions that we make today? And that's what we're going to be talking about. How do we measure success? How does Oak Creek Fire Department, how does the Oak Creek Fire Department measure? One way to do that is to measure where we are today and then figure out where we want to be in the future. The definition of that is strategic planning. I believe it was Winston Churchill that once said, "It is wise to look ahead, but difficult to look further than you can see." That's always resonated with me. It's as it is another way of describing the difficulty of strategic planning. This is why the fire department has invited you to help them, to help clear the fog, if you will, and look beyond the horizon. And our role as the Center for Public Safety Excellence is not to write the strategic plan. We wouldn't be so presumptuous to provide you with a strategic plan, but rather we're going to facilitate this process over a series of 3 days that begin not this coming week, but the week after that, where we're going to be on site working with the internal or agency stakeholders, if you will. We're going to use the data that we get from this meeting and then weave it into what the future will look like. This is a very important process, and I'm so glad that you have invited us as the center to come in and help work with you and your agency. So when I think about orientation versus navigation, allow me to offer you a quick analogy. And if you look at screen left here, you can see a compass. Now that represents what my youth looked like. In fact, as a child, I can tell you that if I was sent off to play in the woods or whatever with my colleagues or my friends, the way that I could find my way out of the woods was by the use of a compass. And the compass is very linear in that it doesn't give us a lot of information, but it does give us north, south, east, and west. So that is certainly a bit of information, but perhaps not enough information. And screen right, what you can see is a illustration, if you will, of navigation. So everybody, not everyone, but many people have a smartphone in their pocket right now. And one of the most powerful tools that's in that smartphone is the GPS, or the Global Positioning System. That GPS provides us more information than just north, south, east, and west. So as an example, I was recently in another city, and when I landed, and I was unfamiliar with the city, and when I landed, I put the address for the hotel into my GPS, and as soon as I left the airport, as luck would have it, I made the wrong turn, and what did my GPS do? Well, it immediately recalculated to provide me the proper direction to get back on track. And ladies and gentlemen, strategic planning is very much like a GPS. It gives you the opportunity to recalculate when the direction of the agency is not going the way it should be, or the way we've always done it. Easy is the enemy of excellence. And as we think about how difficult strategic planning can be, especially if you work alone, or worse yet, if you work in a vacuum without the input of your community. This is a very important process, and I applaud the agency, the Oak Creek Fire Department, for taking this process on. So how will we put this whole thing together? And one of the ways that we're going to do this over 3 days, beginning on, as I said, not next week, but the following week, Tuesday, we're going to ask the agency to go through this process by answering these 5 basic questions that you see on the screen. One of them, why do we exist, can be answered by taking a look at the current mission and values of the organization. Are they current? Are they contemporary? Are they still relevant? Do they tie into the community mission and values? And how does all of that work? The second question is, where are we now? We're going to take a look at the core programs that are delivered to the community and the services that are associated with each one of those to ensure that we are providing the right level of service to the community. The community expects a specific level of service. And part of that, we're going to ask you to help the fire department determine, what's most important. And, I don't want anybody to think that, oh, okay, this is a cut drill or we're looking at reducing services. And it's not like that, nor is the opposite of that true. We're not looking to grow additional services within the community. What we want to do is take a look at what the community expects, demands of their fire department, and then how can the fire department execute that particular vision by the community. Speaking of vision, nice tie-in, where do we want to be? So we're going to help the Oak Creek Fire Department develop a vision for the future. And we're not so presumptuous enough to say that we could write the vision for, the Oak Creek Fire Department. Instead, we're going to help put together the vision for the strategic plan. So we know where we are, but where will the agency be going forward? And that's the definition of vision. Again, looking over the horizon, which, as I already said, can be difficult to do. How do we get there? It can be defined through the development of goals and then specific objectives. So we're going to take a look at all of the issues that may be before the fire department, and then develop a plan to execute the fix, if you will. And nobody is suggesting that the fire department isn't already great. In fact, the Oak Creek Fire Department already has a great reputation, but now what have you done for me lately, right? What are we going to do going forward? And the development of goals and objectives can help with that. Goals, of course, are very strategic, sometimes lofty. They're written sort of at the 30,000-foot level, and then the objectives are very tactical, or how are we going to implement the goals? And we're going to work with the fire department over a series of those 3 days. So mission and values, we're going to work on the very first day. The programs and the services, we're going to work on the very first day, because those lay the foundation for the rest of the work that we'll be doing. The goals and objectives are going to come a little later in the process. But finally, how do we measure our progress? So it's not good enough to develop a plan for the future. It's not good enough to implement the plan, but we also have to determine the efficacy of everything that we do. We're going to talk about something called the family of measures, and the family of measures will help guide the fire department in determining, how well is the new plan working? Because if it's not working, we should stop doing it. If it's not working, we need to start talking about a pivot and going in another direction, perhaps. Another way to take a look at it is something like this. It's a step-by-step process where first we're going to start with, not even on the screen. Before this screen, the very first step is to ask you, what do you think? It's important that we don't work in a vacuum. It's important that fire departments are not self-centered, rather that they are community-driven. And that's what this process is, community-driven strategic planning. So the development of the mission will lead us into the next component, which is to take a look at what are the challenges that are facing this fire department. And then, what are we doing about it? Kind of dovetails right into strategic initiatives. Those strategic initiatives are those high-level issues within the organization that we need to take a look at, and what are some of the causal factors associated with each one of those initiatives. And then, what is our strategy? What are we going to do going forward? How are we going to actually do something with the information? So we don't just gather data, we act on the data. And the gold standard of measurement is the outcome. So when you think about input and output, and I'm going to say this again in just a couple of slides, but outcomes are way more important than just outputs. And like I said, we'll talk more about that in a moment. So here, day one, 2 Tuesdays from now, we're going to review the mission and the values of the Oak Creek Fire Department. These are all about scope or focus for the organization. Are they tied into the community mission and values, and how do they tie specifically to what the community expects or demands, right? And during that process, we're going to, like I said, review the mission and values, and then we'll decide, do we need to keep them exactly the way they are because they're still contemporary and relative or are relevant, or should we tweak them slightly, or should we revise them altogether? I do have commitment from the fire chief that we can do all of that while we're there, but we're not going to change just to change. We're going to change because it ties into what the community expects, no, demands of their fire department. And it's a very, very interesting process, and we're going to do it early on the very first day of the work that we'll be doing with the agency. Also, staying with day one is the SWOT analysis, and I'm certain that everybody on the call understands the acronym SWOT: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But I do want to point out that strengths and weaknesses exist within the four walls of the organization. So within the fire department, there'll be strengths and there'll be weaknesses. And we're going to do something that we call problem spotting or intelligence gathering. So this is still day one, and we're not changing anything. We're not looking to change anything or fix anything. One of the attributes of a fire department, and I'm certain you know this, is that we want to fix things. So a problem is put before us, and we want to immediately come to the fix. But we will work carefully with this organization to ensure that day one is nothing more than problem spotting or intelligence gathering. And that's really our role as facilitators. We're not going to write the strategic plan for this fire department. In fact, quite the opposite. We're not consultants. We don't come into your agency, borrow your watch, and tell you what time it is. Our role in this process is to facilitate a dialogue and then gather information. And we will capture absolutely everything that is said in the room, and we will help formulate the plan, but we're certainly not going to write it. And then opportunities and threats exist outside of the four walls of the organization. So we'll have a discussion about, what are some of those external factors that affect this fire department's ability to be successful, or better yet, help them continue to be successful. So would you say that this particular organizational systems model looks familiar? I mean, is this a pretty normal, if you will, model? So take a look at it for just a moment. On the left side, you have inputs. An example of an input could be perhaps staff hours or money, right? And then the middle represents the process that you have to run through when you're working through the development of a solution or the development of how we deliver services to the community. On the outside of the process are outside environmental factors that affect the ability either negatively or positively for this fire department to be successful. So inputs, process, and then on the other side, we have an output. An example of an output would be additional certifications for the firefighters. Now, would you say that that's an important output? Because I certainly think it's an important output, but is it really what we're looking for? And maybe the answer is that structure looks a little something like this. We call this the fog, if you will, because there's so much going on in this slide. But look at the left side of the screen for just a moment. It's exactly like the previous slide. They're all inputs: time, money, people, energy. But now take a look at what we call or the middle, where all of that activity is going on, right? So internal to the fire department, strengths and weaknesses exist in that interior bubble. Things like, communications and training and discipline and culture and all of those things, right? And then on the outside of the bubble, those outside environmental factors, if you will, public policy issues and regulations and politics and economic variables, and all of those things represent what? Opportunities and threats. And all of those things, as we put inputs into the left side of this screen, there's a lot of fog. There's a lot of flurry of activity, a lot of almost a whirlwind, if you will, of activity that as the fire department is trying to figure out, all right, what is it we're going to do going forward, and how can we improve the level of services that we provide to the community to ensure that we're meeting the community's expectations? Well, all of those things are impacting us, but the desired outcome, and I use that word very deliberately, outcome, is on the right side of the screen. Outcomes are the gold standard of measurement. And you can see here, we're talking about things like improved patient outcomes or reduced fire loss or lower insurance rates and things like that. All right. So we're going to help the fire department focus not on outputs, which are important. And, they're very quantifiable. We responded to X number of fires. So that's an output, right? But outcomes are at a much higher scale or level than outputs. We're now concerned about what is the impact of what the fire department is doing in the community? What is the overall impact? Are we seeing a reduction in fire loss or injuries or things like that? So that's what we're going to help the fire department do with all of this information. So why are you here? Why are you here? You're here because the fire department cared enough to ask you for your input. It's important that we understand what our customers want. And I transition there for just a second into the business world, because if we don't listen to the customers are going to go somewhere else. Right now, I'm not suggesting that for fire and emergency services, you can just go get another fire department to come respond to your home or to your business or anywhere in the community. We're not suggesting that, but it's important that we understand what our stakeholders, people that have a stake in what the fire department does. It's important that we understand what it is that they expect from each of us. So we're going to conduct in just a few minutes, we're going to conduct in 2 separate surveys. We're going to send you the feedback instruments that we're going to be looking for your response on. And once you start on the survey, you should know that I'm going to stay on the call until everybody is done. You're welcome during the survey component of this to turn on your microphone if you have any questions, because although I intend to turn off my camera, I'm still going to be here, and I'll mute myself just so you don't hear me clicking on my keyboard or something. But what I would ask you to do at the end, when I'm done explaining the rest of these instruments, I would ask you to let me know if you have any questions or concerns as you go through. And I'm going to explain each one of the instruments here in just a moment. So I'm not just going to turn you loose, if you will. All right, so let's take a look at everything that we're going to be asking you about. And the first link that you're going to get is going to ask you about your expectations. And also the next question, which will be on concerns, are in your priority order. And here's what I mean by that. I'm going to give you a non-fire service related example about what an expectation could be. So I will tell you that each morning when I get up and I go downstairs to the car, I have an expectation that when I start the car, it'll start, of course, and then it will safely take me to wherever it is I'm going. So that's an example of an expectation. I'm going to ask you to list your 5 expectations, and you may be sitting in a room with another person that's also taken the survey. They may have different expectations, but I'm interested specifically in your expectations. And when you list them, please put them in your priority order, meaning your most important or your highest expectation, if you will be the first thing that you list, and then on down up to 5. And we say up to 5 very deliberately, because if you have less than 5, it's okay. I mean, I'm not asking you, of course, hey, you have to come up with 5. No, if you only have, whatever that number may be, please ensure you list them in priority order. And then after the expectations will come customer concerns. Now, you remember in the expectations, I said, well, I expect my car rather, to take me safely to where I'm going. Concerns are a concern for the fire department. So one may be negative, one may be positive, depending on your perspective. But either way, or maybe they're neutral. I mean, that's really in your eyes. But my example for concerns in that same car example is, I have a concern that perhaps the car doesn't start because I didn't keep up on the maintenance, or I have a flat tire, or I don't have any fuel in the car. These are all examples of concerns. All right, so expectations up to 5 in your priority order, concerns up to 5 in your priority order. Then still in that first survey, we're going to ask you about strengths, and the strengths are not listed in priority order. In other words, don't be concerned about what order that you list them when you put them in your survey. What's important to us, what's important to the fire department is that if you find something to be a strength or a positive of this organization, you should tell them, because quite frankly, if the fire department rather is doing something well, then they should continue to do it. And that's why it's important that we tell them if they're doing something well. So strengths or positives, if you will, up to 5, no priority order. And then finally, you have you have an opportunity rather to provide just general comments. And the general comments can be anything. And, sometimes we get a story of relative success, where you've used the fire department services perhaps, or sometimes, we just get general remarks, whether it be about the organization itself or, perhaps a staff member or a service that they provide. Could be about anything is what I'm really saying. You could actually mention my tie. I'm kidding. Don't mention my tie. But you know my point. It's wide open, and you have 5 spots for that as well. So just like all the others, up to 5, but no more than 5. And this is what the instrument looks like. And I'm not expecting you to read it because I don't know how large your computer screen is right now. But on screen left are expectations and concerns, and a reminder in the red font that they are in your priority order. And the nice thing about doing these things electronically, because it's more typical, or it has been more typical over the years, prior to last year, of course, where we did these in person. But doing it electronically gives you the idea or an opportunity to move things around. If you decide later, oh, I thought of this and I forgot to put it in here, and you can certainly move things around. And then on screen right, as I said, you're going to have positives or strengths on the top right of screen right there, and then below that are any additional or relevant comments. So please understand that your input is so critical to the success of this strategic planning process that I can't understate that enough. So the other survey that we'll be using is called the program matrix, or the prioritization matrix. Sometimes we use that term, and it's where we're going to ask you to compare each of these services to each other. And you can see on the screen are the 8 core programs that Oak Creek Fire Department provides to the community. Please do not read into the order whatsoever. In fact, the fire department didn't get to select the order that we put them on the screen. We, meaning the Center for Public Safety Excellence, put this order together. So just because it's listed higher on this list doesn't mean that the fire department is suggesting it's more important to them. That is not the case. So I want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about each of these programs and tell you what each of these programs mean. Even if you're very familiar with it, forgive me, I won't spend a lot of time here, but I do want to present them individually, tell you what they are, and then let you know that in the survey that the definition for each of these programs is actually provided for you in the survey as well, so that in case you've forgotten or maybe you didn't take notes as I went through this piece, which you don't need to, all of these definitions will be provided to you in just a moment. And then I'll tell you what we're going to do with each of those definitions in a moment. But let's take a look at prevention for just a moment. So prevention can be defined as the of risk through fire code enforcement or new building plans reviews or occupancy inspections or things like that. So essentially, it's a mitigating factor. It includes things like codes and ordinances and, like I said, building plan reviews and things like that. So it's fire inspections is the major theme there. The next one down is called Public Fire and Life Safety Education. This is where the Oak Creek Fire Department provides fire and life safety education training to the public. Think about things like, stop, drop, and roll, or working with the kids, or fire truck displays, or kitchen fires, or all of those things associated with providing education or training to the community. Now, fire investigation is where the Oak Creek Fire Department conduct a determination of fire cause and origin, including things like evidence collection and investigation. And the purpose for that is quite simply, if we can determine what has caused a fire, then perhaps we can prevent future or similar fires of that nature in the future, rather. All right, emergency management. So I want to talk about emergency management for just a second. And emergency management is not only provided by the fire department, but it's a collaboration between multiple agencies. And the purpose of emergency management is the promotion of awareness, preparation, incident management, and emergency response to either natural disasters or man-made disasters. So natural disasters could be a weather event like ice or snow or flooding and things like that. And the human-made disasters, if you will, could be a terrorist event, or it could be an event involving, like I said, people. Okay, so fire suppression may sound very familiar because we're talking about the Oak Creek Fire Department. Nothing more than emergency extinguishment of any building or vehicle, aviation, wildland fire, or urban interface for other fires, or things like that. So fire suppression. Emergency medical services, you may be aware that, obviously these are emergency medical responses, which include advanced life support and transportation, meaning taking the patient all the way to a care facility. So that's emergency medical services. Technical rescue is one of those things that is, as the name would imply, right? It's very technical. Think about entrapment in vehicles or machinery, or confined space rescues, or high angle rescues, or water and ice rescue, or things like that. So very technical rescues in nature. Think about the jaws of life. Those are used during the technical rescue aspect. All right. And then hazardous materials mitigation is nothing more than emergency incident stabilization of dangerous materials, including or involving rather buildings or industrial areas or the interstate or railways or things like that. So responding to incidents involving hazardous chemicals of some sort. So when you get the first, or when you get this link, which is the SurveyMonkey link number 2, it's called Customer Priorities. There are 28 choices that you must make. And essentially, you're going to compare each one of those programs to each other. And it's important for you to understand that you can't leave any of them blank, no matter how difficult the choice is. So if I ask you as an example, what's more important to you, fire suppression or emergency medical services? You in your mind might say, well, I think those are equal, so I don't want to make a choice. Unfortunately, you can't leave any of them blank because it will invalidate the instrument. The instrument that we're going to show you has been developed from academia. In other words, we didn't develop that particular survey. We found it to have great credibility, but it is difficult. And like I said, there's going to be 28 total choices. I'm going to show you what the instrument looks like in just a moment. But I just want to give you an example of a similar type of instrument, if you will, and that's your eye exam. And when you think about and I know we all love this exam when you go to the eye doctor and he says, well, what's better, A or B? B or C? And sometimes it's difficult for us to ascertain a response to that, because they look very similar, but it's critical that you make one choice or the other. So a non-fire service example I will give you, a whole bunch of years ago when I was a young man, I can tell you that at the end of the month, if I had a little bit of money left over, I had to decide, what were my priorities for the excess funds that I might have at the end of the month. And one of the choices could be, well, maybe I'll put a little extra money towards the mortgage, or perhaps I'll pay down a little bit of my college loan, or perhaps I'll put money towards retirement, or put money towards recreation and vacation or something. So now I've just given you, just off the top of my head, I've given you 4 different choices. Where should I put the money? What are my priorities? And this forced choice, and that's kind of the nickname for this survey that I'm about to show you, is a little bit like that, where we have to decide, what's more important to us? What is our priority? And we're truly looking for your input. And the survey looks like this. You can see on screen left, we'll have all the definitions one more time for you. And then on screen right, we're going to ask you 28 different questions. It sounds like a lot, but I promise you it goes fast. But if you take a look at the question number 1, it says, which service is priority for you in your mind? So now you have to choose between prevention and public fire and life safety education. And you can refer back to screen left and see the definitions. And once you've answered that question, you'll go down to the next one. What service is a priority for you? Prevention or fire investigation? And if you can look at the screen right for just a moment, all the questions are related to prevention and everything else. Once you have compared prevention to everything else that's on this list, then the next questions that follow, prevention will drop off, and we'll start off with public fire and life safety education. And you won't see prevention again for the rest of the survey. And once you've compared public fire and life safety education to everything else on the list, then it begins over with the next service for you to compare to. So that's kind of how the survey instruments go. I have talked a lot. At this point, I'm going to make a couple of recommendations as we turn you over to your survey. First of all, please consider turning off your camera for the survey component of this, because quite often as people are taking the survey, it looks a little something like this as folks are looking at their screen. And while I do find that a little humorous, obviously, it's unnecessary. So please consider turning off your camera for that. Also leave your microphone muted unless you have any questions. I intend to mute myself, and I will also turn off my camera, but I'm not going anywhere because I need to stay here until you have completed your survey. And then if you have any questions, of course, I'll be available and I'll unmute myself to speak again. So again, it's been my absolute pleasure to sit in front of you for the last, half a dozen, well, a little more than a dozen perhaps slides. Please take your survey now. It should be in your email box. If it isn't, send us a chat and we'll figure out what's going on with your survey. And we look forward to compiling your data and then working with your fire department in just a week and a half. Thanks very much. Okay, a question has come up in the chat box regarding what happens when we're done, and the answer is you're free to go. In fact, once you log out of the Zoom meeting, that is our indication that you have completed your survey. Thanks once again.